So today, we're talking about a name you might know from the edges of history's most famous year, 1066, Harald Hardrada. But his story is so much more than just his final battle. It's really the story of the last great Viking king. Right, so when you hear 1066, an invasion of England, you're probably thinking William the Conqueror, right? The Battle of Hastings, the whole shebang. But what if I told you that weeks before all that, another massive invasion force had already landed? A Viking army, led by a king whose life, honestly, sounds like it was ripped from a fantasy novel. And the man in charge? Well, one writer at the time called him the Thunderbolt of the North. I mean, come on, a nickname like that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. This was not your average monarch.
So who was this man, this Thunderbolt, who actually beat William the Conqueror to England's shores? And how in the world did a Norwegian king end up there in the first place? Well, to get that, we've got to rewind the clock. Because Harold's invasion of England, it wasn't some sudden decision. Nope. It was the final, incredible, audacious chapter in a life that was all about exile, warfare, and an absolutely relentless hunt for power.
You see, his story doesn't start with a crown. It starts with a teenager fighting on the losing side of a pretty brutal civil war.
Picture this, it's 1030. A 15-year-old Harald is fighting to put his half-brother, Olaf, back on the throne of Norway. But they get crushed. Olaf is killed, and Harald, who's been badly wounded, has to flee for his life. And what followed was just this incredible 15-year journey. He escapes from Norway, somehow ends up as a captain in Kiev and Rus, and then makes his way to Constantinople, the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire. There he joins the most famous, most elite mercenary unit in the entire world, the Varangian Guard. And for more than a decade, he fights, he schemes, he earns, all with one goal in mind: to come back home with enough money and power to take back a throne. Now we have to spend a minute on his time in Byzantium, because this is where the legend of Harald Hardrada was really forged in fire. So, the Varangian Guard, these guys were the absolute elite, the emperor's personal bodyguards and his military sledgehammer. Mostly made up of Norsemen, they were legendary for their loyalty and their ferocity. And Harald, he didn't just join them. According to the stories, he rose through the ranks to become their commander, the leader of the most feared warriors in the known world. And his list of accomplishments, his mercenary resume, was just staggering. We're told he fought on pretty much every border of the empire. He's battling pirates in the Med, he's leading armies to reconquer Sicily, he's campaigning so fiercely in Bulgaria that he gets the nickname Bulgar Burner. This wasn't a king sitting on a throne, this was a general on the front lines for over a decade. His own court poet later claimed he fought in 18 major battles during his service. 18! Think about that for a second. So, how did he get so unbelievably rich? Well, it wasn't just the spoils of war. He cashed in on this bizarre Byzantine tradition called pollutisvarf, which literally means palace plunder. See, whenever an emperor died, the Varangian Guard got a massive payout from the treasury to, make sure they were loyal to the next guy. Harald got to do this 3 times. He amassed a fortune that was just mind-boggling, and that money was going to be his ticket to a crown. So now, with a legendary reputation and a literal boatload of gold, Harald finally heads back to Norway. He's ready to take back the kingdom he lost as a boy. But there's a problem. His own nephew, Magnus the Good, is on the throne. So instead of starting a huge bloody war, Harald pulls off a brilliant move. He uses his cash to raise an army and basically forces Magnus into a deal. They would rule Norway together. Harald would share his gold if Magnus shared the crown. And then, kind of conveniently for Harald, Magnus dies just 1 year later. Suddenly, he's the sole king of Norway. As king, he quickly earned the name we all know him by today, Hardrada. But here's the thing, it was not a compliment. His enemies gave it to him, and it translates to the hard ruler, or more bluntly, ruthless. And believe me, it was a name he earned by just brutally crushing anyone who stood in his way. If you want to get a sense of how people felt about him, just listen to this quote from one of his biggest rivals, a guy named Einar Thumbarskjolfr. He said, "To follow Magnus dead was better than to follow any other king alive." Wow. That tells you everything about the fear, and maybe the grudging respect he commanded. But here's a really interesting twist. While the later Icelandic sagas locked in the name Hardrada, some earlier English sources actually called him Harald Fairhair. Some historians think that might have been the image he wanted for himself, a callback to a legendary king who first unified Norway. It kind of hints at a man who was very aware of his own legacy, trying to craft an image that was totally different from the one his enemies were painting.
And that brings us right back where we started, full circle to 1066. After almost 20 years of ruling Norway, the throne of England suddenly becomes vacant, and Harald sees it, his last, best chance for ultimate glory.
He gets an invitation from Tostig Godwinson, the exiled, angry brother of the new English king, and Harald goes all in. He puts together a massive fleet, nearly 300 ships, with maybe as many as 15,000 men. He sails for England, and at first, everything goes perfectly. On September 20th, he meets and defeats the northern English earls at the Battle of Fulford, a huge victory.
But the English king, Harald Godwinson, did something nobody expected. He responded with unbelievable speed. He force-marched his entire army, an incredible 185 miles, in just 4 days. I mean, that is a stunning achievement. And he caught the Viking army completely and totally by surprise.
The two armies crashed into each other at a place called Stamford Bridge. The Vikings were not expecting a battle. They were chillin', thinking they were about to accept the surrender of the region. And in a fateful, terrible error, many of them, including King Harald himself, had left their heavy chainmail armor back with the ships. Still, the old warrior did what he did best. He went into what the sagas call a berserker gong, a state of unstoppable, furious rage, and charged into the fight.
But for a warrior, no matter how legendary, fighting without armor is a death sentence. He was struck in the throat by an arrow and killed. And just like that, it was over. The thunderbolt of the north had fallen, and his army was completely shattered.
The death of this one incredible man and the utter destruction of his grand army at Stamford Bridge, well, it was so much more than just a single lost battle.
So why is this one moment so important? Why do so many historians point to this battle and say, that's it, that's the end of the Viking Age? Because it was. This was the last great Scandinavian invasion of England. The defeat was so total, it effectively ended the era of massive Viking expeditions that it shaped and terrified Europe for almost 300 years. Yeah, 3 weeks later, another Harald would lose his throne at Hastings. But the age of the Vikings, that died with Hardrada, in a field in northern England.